Hello, good evening everyone, and welcome back to another of Maurice Nicoll's commentaries. This one, a rather important one on a fundamental concept, the law of three. And following on from this, we will move on to the law of seven and then into some psychological talks. But again, if you're familiar with In Search of the Miraculous and the fourth way, you'll be aware of this concept and how deeply it runs throughout the whole of Gurdjieff's system. And just before we begin with Maurice Nicoll's commentary, I'd just like to read you just one page, I suppose, from In Search of the Miraculous. You can find it in chapter 4, and so that's available already on the channel. I'm working through In Search of the Miraculous, then into the fourth way as we progress through Maurice Nicoll's commentaries at the same time, and perhaps after we finish the fourth way, maybe it's time for another reading of Beelzebub's Tales. So do let me know if that's interesting for you. But just very quickly, this is in chapter 4 of In Search of the Miraculous. Before examining these influences, began G, and the laws of transformation of unity into plurality, we must examine the fundamental law that creates all phenomena in all the diversity or unity of all universes. This is the law of three, or the law of the three principles or the three forces. It consists of the fact that every phenomena, on whatever scale and in whatever world it may take place, from molecular to cosmic phenomena, is the result of the combination of or the meeting of three different and opposing forces. Contemporary thought realizes the existence of two forces and the necessity of these two forces for the production of a phenomena: force and resistance, positive and negative magnetism, positive and negative electricity, male and female cells, and so on. But it does not observe even these two forces always and everywhere. No question has ever been raised as to the third, or if it has been raised, it has scarcely been heard. According to real exact knowledge, one force or two forces can never produce a phenomenon. The presence of a third force is necessary, for it is only with the help of a third force that the first two can produce what may be called a phenomenon, no matter in what sphere. And again, you can find that in chapter 4 of In Search of the Miraculous, to listen to the whole context, to listen to the whole introduction to the concept of the laws of three and the laws of seven. And hello there, Sophia. Lovely to see you. And Sophia says cheers to all. So let us know if you're watching and listening. And Flippity Gibbets has arrived also. Hello there, Mr. Thompson, and says Sophia means wisdom. And I believe you're right. So it's an apt name for Sophia. And also philosophy comes from that root. Sophia, the love of wisdom. So, yeah, we're learning a lot already. But it's lovely to have you here. Again, you can do a search in the PDF of In Search of the Miraculous or the Fourth Way to find much more information about this. But for now, we will begin with Birdlip, January the 25th, 1942. The Law of Three. Part 1. To what ultimate principles, to what fundamental laws can the universe and all its manifestations and processes be reduced? According to the teaching of this work, there are behind all things two ultimate laws, called respectively the law of three and the law of seven. These two laws are fundamental. From the standpoint of this teaching, the universe is created. We live in, firstly, a created, and secondly, an ordered universe. If the universe were chaos, there would be no order and no laws. Cosmos literally means order as distinct from chaos. If the world were chaos, the study of the laws of matter and so on would be impossible. Science could not exist. The law of three is the law of the three forces of creation. This law states that three forces must enter into every manifestation. But creation is governed by another law, the law of seven, or the law of order of manifestation. Creative forces could not work unless they created in some order, and this order of manifestation or order of creation is due to the law of seven. But at present we have to speak only of the law of three. Every manifestation in the universe is a result of the combination of three forces. These forces are called active force, passive force, and neutralizing force. Active force is called first force, passive force is called second force, and neutralizing force is called third force. First force can be defined as initiating force, second force as force of resistance or reaction, and third force as balancing or relating principle or connecting force or point of application. These three forces are found both in nature and in man. Throughout the universe, on every plane, these three forces are at work. They are the creative forces. Nothing is produced without the conjunction of these three forces. The conjunction of these three forces constitutes a triad. One triad creates another triad, both in the vertical scale and in the horizontal scale of time. In time, what we call the chain of events is a chain of triads. Every manifestation, every creation results from the meeting together of these three forces, active, passive, and neutralizing. Active force or first force cannot create anything by itself. Passive force or second force cannot create anything by itself. Neutralizing force or third force cannot create anything by itself. Nor can any two of the three forces produce a manifestation. It is necessary that all the three forces meet together for any manifestation or creation to take place. This can be represented in this way. So here we have diagram 2, where the active force is in a different direction to neutralizing and passive force, and so there is no manifestation. Whereas in diagram 2, the active force, passive force, and neutralizing force are all working towards each other, and so there is manifestation. And I'm sure Maurice Nicoll is going to clear that up. The three forces are only creative at the point of their conjunction, and here a manifestation, a creation, an event takes place, but not otherwise. Out of all the infinite number of things that could happen, only a few actually take place, namely when these three forces meet in conjunction. If they do not all meet, then nothing can take place. For example, if active force and passive force meet, nothing can happen. No event will take place. But if neutralizing force appears, then there will be the three forces at work, and something will take place. A triad will be present, that is, a triad composed of the three forces, and wherever the three forces meet in conjunction as a triad, a manifestation must result. Every triad, every conjunction of three forces can give rise to another triad, and under right conditions, a chain of triads results. It is always from the neutralizing force, that is, the third force, that a new triad springs. So here we have number 1, active force, 2 is passive force on the right, 3 neutralizing force in the middle, and then a new triad starts from here. In the next triad, the neutralizing force of the prior triad becomes active or passive force. We will speak another time of this. The neutralizing force or third force in a triad brings the active force and the passive force into relationship. It connects them together somewhat in the same way as the fulcrum brings the two sides of a balance into relation. Without the neutralizing force, the active and passive forces would cancel each other out because they are opposed to one another. They are opposites. A connecting or relative force is necessary. Neutralizing force is intermediary between active and passive forces. When the right neutralizing force is present, an active and a passive force no longer oppose one another uselessly, but are brought into a working relationship that creates a manifestation. For example, a machine can be sometimes regarded as neutralizing force. A rough example is a windmill. The active or originating force is the wind. The passive or resisting force is the building. The turning sails make a relation between the pressure of the wind and the resistance of the building, and a manifestation takes place. If there are no sails, or if the building collapses, or if there is no wind, there is no manifestation. This is only a very rough illustration, but I would argue a very good illustration, and of course Gurdjieff and Ouspensky and Maurice Nicoll, I'm quite sure, would say we need to observe these things in our own lives, just like Maurice Nicoll has given us a very rough illustration of the three forces in action with a windmill. We can do the same. We can look in our own lives and also in our own inner life. Active force is I want to get up and get a drink. Passive force is, but I'm comfortable here on the sofa. And then neutralizing force is when those two things come together and an activity happens. So maybe that's even more rough than Maurice Nicoll's example, but there you go. And hello there, Valdemar Wagner. It's lovely to see you, and it's like old times, isn't it, guys? It's like old times. All we need now is old Graham, and it would be like old times. So lovely to see you all, and welcome, and I hope you find some value in this reading. The idea of three forces is found in religion in the conception of the Trinity. In science, the idea of different forces exists, as in positive and negative electrical charges, of which matter is ultimately composed. But in science, the idea of a third or relating force is not yet distinct. The fact that three forces create means that three wills create. The first order of creation is therefore subject to three wills or three laws, and it follows that subsequent orders of creation proceeding from the first order are under more and more laws. So here we have this is going into the ray of creation now. So here we have one, the absolute, having one will, uncreate. The first order of creation, three wills or laws, and then the second order of creation, six wills or laws, three of its own, and three acting from the first order, etc. Again, you'll find all this information in Search of the Miraculous. The three forces are said to proceed from unity. This unity is termed the absolute, which means that which is not conditioned or limited in any way, and so under no laws save its own will. Since three forces are necessary for any manifestation, the absolute is unmanifest or uncreate. The absolute is beyond all human thought. Creation proceeds vertically downwards into increasing density of laws and further away from the absolute. As we shall see, in the ray of creation, the earth comes at a very low level in the vertical scale of the universe. Part 2. Change in the quality of the neutralizing force will not only alter the relation of forces in a triad, but may reverse the active and passive forces. When life is neutralizing force, personality is active in man, and essence is passive. So here we have another diagram here. On the left, personality conducting active force, so all of the many I's that we learn about. Then you have life as neutralizing force and essence conductive passive force. So again, all rather complicated if you're new to the terminology, but once you learn to speak the language, you can become fluent. And let's continue. When the work is neutralizing force, the position is reversed, namely essence or the real part becomes active and personality or the acquired part passive. In this case, we have to consider again the significance of the vertical and horizontal lines of the cross. We can conceive the neutralizing force of life acting along the horizontal line and the neutralizing force of the work entering at every moment from the vertical direction, and only felt when a man ceases to identify with the things of time and remembers himself. Think back to a couple of readings ago where we had the aspect or the concept of time, and then the vertical aspect of being. Let us now speak of the three forces in their psychological aspect. The study of the three forces begins with the study of them in oneself. As was said, three forces exist in nature and in man. It is very difficult to see the three forces. They must be studied at first psychologically, that is, as they exist in oneself by means of self-observation. Active force or first force can be taken as what one wants, i.e. a drink of water. Passive force or second force can be taken as what resists or prevents what one wants, i.e. being comfortable on the sofa. This is as far as one must go to begin with. It is impossible to see the third force until one sees first force and second force. So maybe that's why I didn't have a good example of the third force, but I'm sure we'll get there. The second force, or force of resistance, exists in everything. That is to what we want, there is inevitably a force of resistance. If people realize this, they will not blame so much as they do, nor will they feel that their difficulties are unique. I will speak briefly of one or two points in connection with the study of the three forces on the psychological side. In making aim, second force must be calculated, otherwise the aim will be unpractical. If you make an aim, you must count the cost of keeping it. When you do so, you will probably make your aim more practical. Aim must not be too difficult. Everything that prevents you from keeping your aim is second force, provided you wish to keep your aim. Let us suppose you make an artificial temporary aim that you will not sit down all day. Then you will notice second force in yourself in connection with this aim, namely, what resists you, what opposes your keeping this aim, all the different I's, the different arguments, etc. The nature of the second force will of course be determined by the nature of the first force, in this case, the aim you want to keep. Do not attempt to try to see third force. It is quite useless at first. But try to see first force and then second force. You cannot see second force unless you see first force. It is first force that makes second force appear. If you want nothing, there is no second force, insofar as your desire is concerned. People do not even know what first force is in themselves, that is, they do not know what they really want. Ask yourself sometimes, what do I want? You must be sincere in noticing what you really want. If a man pretends he wants something and really does not, his active force is what he really wants. He is lying to himself. We have spoken briefly of the law of three forces in their psychological aspect. Next time we will begin to speak of the ray of creation in the light of the three forces of creation. That is, we will consider the law of three in its cosmological application. And before we move on to that, these are two very distinct aspects of the work that you'll find in Search of the Miraculous and all across the canonical books, the psychological and the cosmological. Gurdjieff says we need to study these things both in ourselves, self-observation, and in the universe. Some things are easier to observe in the universe, other things in ourselves, and it's very clear here, this law of three and also the law of seven or the law of octaves that we'll move on to very shortly. You can see them both in oneself and in the ray of creation. And of course, the ray of creation is a cosmological diagram that we'll get to, and rather technical. And again, I was speaking to someone recently and they were saying, sometimes the intellectual center struggles to grasp these things, but the emotional center can take them up. But that's for another video. Part 3. Let us take the phrase already used, namely, the fact that three forces create means that three wills create. It may be asked if these three wills which proceed from the Absolute are identical when in conjunction with the will of the Absolute itself. This cannot be assumed, for it reverses the order of creation by making three pass into one. Three cannot pass into one save by the will of the Absolute, and this would mean the indrawing of all creation. Notice that if you divide three into one, you get three repeating to infinity. The created universe proceeds from the Absolute by reason of the three forces which no longer as such belong to the uncreate Absolute. Compare the Christian cosmology where the Athanasian Creed it is said, there are not three uncreate, but one uncreate. The Absolute is uncreate, unmanifest, unconditioned, and this is beyond all human thought. The three forces proceeding from the Absolute in the first act of creation are already conditioned, 1, by the single will of the Absolute, and 2, by their mutual relation to one another as active, passive, and neutralizing. These forces at their primal level are all conscious but already limited, and as their reduplication proceeds in the outbreathing or descending order of creation of all things, they become increasingly mechanical and limited the further they are in the vertical scale from the Absolute. If we were to say that the sum total of the primal three forces in conjunction together made the single will of the Absolute, we would imply that the primal three forces would pass into the Absolute on conjunction with each other, in which case there would be no creation. 3 would pass into 1. But it is the will of the Absolute to create, and the three forces or separate wills of creation proceed in consequence from the Absolute, and cannot return unless it is the will of the Absolute itself to draw in all creation. The three primal forces unite to create the universe in successive stages. They do not unite to form the single will of the Absolute, which is uncreate, for if their conjunction made a unity identical with the will of the Absolute, there would be no creative process. And it's a rather interesting term, isn't it? Uncreate. Because to create is necessarily to manifest something, to bring something into being, and to put the prefix un before it, uncreate. It's a rather strange term. So now we move on to part 4, which is on the study of three forces in oneself. Part 4. We have greater opportunities of observing ourselves than of observing the external world. We live very little in the external world, which is foreign to us. We are intermittently aware of it, but notice very little about it. We can pass the same house 1,000 times and be unable to describe it. Actually, we are far more permanent even for ourselves than is the world. This is one reason why the study of three forces begins with self-observation. Also, you must remember that a force is invisible, and our more direct contact with what is invisible is by means of self-observation. You must understand that in trying to study this question of forces, you are not studying things. A desire is a force, not a thing, for example. A train of thought is a force and is not a thing. An idea is a force, not a thing. One reason why we have so much difficulty in understanding three forces is that we tend to see in everything one force. We think of force as one, and in everything that happens, in any manifestation, in any event, we tend to see merely one force. We attribute it to one force. We see one action in one event. This is partly due to our inability to think of more than one thing at a time as a rule. Sometimes we think in terms of two things, but to think in terms of three things is beyond us, i.e., it is beyond formatory thought. An event, for instance, must always be good or bad, right or wrong for us. We see only one action in it, and further, we do not even think of events being due to forces. We see an apple falling from the tree and merely see the apple now lying on the ground. We see a magnet attracting or repulsing one pole of a compass. We see it all, but scarcely think of forces, in this case obviously different kinds of forces. Nor do we notice how forces change for us. At one moment we are attracted by a thing, and next moment repelled by the same thing. Or we are repelled, and then an idea comes to us and we feel attracted. We do not realize that the thing at one time conducts one force and at another time an opposite one. In the same way, our relationship to a person changes. That is, the person undergoes a change of sign for us, and this means that in the triad of forces that produce the relationship, there has been a change of forces. For example, mechanical love can turn to hate, mechanical trust to suspicion, and so on. All such ordinary manifestations in human life are due to forces and changes in these forces. I'm not asking you to designate in such cases the forces, but to notice them. The Law of Three, Part 5. In speaking of the ray of creation, I wish to connect it with your thoughts in some way. Everyone can admit that the universe is created, and many believe that it is. They say, if they are, for example, religious, that God created the universe. Also, they have heard of the Trinity, if they are Christians, and may or may not have thought about it. And they may or may not have thought about it. In any case, the idea of the creation of the world by God and some vague notion of the Trinity may exist in their minds, but no connection is made. For example, even if they have thought that creation is in some way connected with the Trinity, they do not see the inevitable consequence of three wills at work in creation. They merely think that God created everything, as it were, all around him, like a lot of toys, and that no laws were at work. And although in the allegorical account of creation in Genesis they are told that the universe was created on successive days, they do not think that any scale is meant here, and that creation is not all at the same level, but descends in order of degrees, lower and lower. Consequently, they are inclined to think that God's will is directly in touch with and in charge of everything created. They omit to think of the meaning of the Trinity, that is, the primal three forces or three wills that bring about creation, and so think that the will of God reaches directly every created thing. Some religions teach only the unity of God, such as the Mohammedan religion. The Christian religion teaches the Trinity. The psychological consequences are very great. If people believe only in God, they think that God's will is done everywhere and in everything, and so tend to fanaticism, persecution, and so on. Not that Christianity can show anything much different, but at the same time this religion contains the idea of the Trinity, which comes between God and the world. The connection of God, or the Absolute, and the process of creation can only be understood through the Trinity or primal triad of three forces and the derivation of subsequent triads. As an ancient saying puts it, God is difficult to understand, for he is first one, then three, and then seven. To return to the ray of creation, the first triad of three forces proceeds from the Absolute and creates the first order of worlds, which is under three laws, that is, the three wills of the primal triad. And so here we have very simply the first order of worlds, or the first two order of worlds, or maybe just the first, as the Absolute stands above and outside of the creation. The Absolute and the first order of created worlds, or world 3. This is the first act of creation represented diagrammatically. Actually, it is a living process, inconceivable and eternal. By the term world 3 is meant the first level of creation, subject to three wills, laws or wills. This world creates in turn another order of worlds below it, which has three forces of its own. This is called world 6 because it is under three wills or laws acting on it from world 3. This process of creation continues. The next order of worlds, therefore, is world 12, having three forces of its own, 6 derived from world 6 and 3 derived directly from world 3. In a similar way, three further worlds are created, making in all 6 orders of worlds or 6 descending levels of creation below the Absolute, all knit together by laws. And if you remember me talking about escaping mechanical laws, or escaping laws in generally, escaping the law of accident, this all comes to this, because as you see, as you descend into creation from the Absolute, there are more and more laws active, and as you see when we move down towards the planet Earth and then the moon, you'll see this where most laws are active, and we can ascend, if you like. So here we have the Absolute, world 3 under 3 laws, world 6 under 6 laws, world 12 under 12 laws, world 24 under 24 laws. The position of the Earth in the ray is world 48 under 48 laws, and world 96, which is the moon, under 96 laws. The process of creation halts at world 96 for a reason that will be explained when the law of 7 or law of order of creation is given. World 96, at the termination of the ray of creation, is under 96 laws. This world, or this order of worlds, is furthest from the absolute and under the greatest density of laws. The further the process of creation proceeds from the absolute, the greater the number of laws. What is necessary to grasp is that creation necessarily implies laws, and this arises from the very fact that 3 forces are necessary for any manifestation. There can be no creation without laws, and this means that every created thing is inevitably under laws. That is, nothing created is free. Now, if we consider this vertical line of creation, we can see that if we could ascend it, we would pass under fewer and fewer laws. That is, we would gain more and more freedom. Whereas if we were to descend, we would pass under more and more restrictions, and so be less and less free. If a creature, a being, is created at the level of world 12, it finds itself under 12 laws or orders of laws. If it falls to the level of world 48, it is under 48 laws. Man as he is at a certain level in the ray, at a certain level in the ray. But he is created in such a way that he can change his level upwards or downwards, and so pass under fewer laws or more laws. Flibbity gibbets, I've just got a few pages to go and then I'll address that question, my friend. So rather than digress here, we're nearly finished. 2 pages to go, so I'll address that in a moment. A man, if he knows how, can put himself under one kind of influence or another kind. So here we have another diagram. So there we go. That's an alternative version of the ray of creation. The next point is that creation is forcible. That is, it is brought about by force. It begins with the work of the primal triad of 3 forces derived from the absolute and continues by the reduplication again and again of further triads of 3 forces. The ultimate or last point of creation, world 96, is under many forces. This means enormous forces are locked up in creation. Through the action of the law of 3, the universe is wound up. Sometimes in nature we can see these forces unwinding themselves, as for instance in the element radium. And yeah, no problem, flibbity gibbets. That's a good thing to do, like you say, so that you don't forget the thought. And that might be an interesting thing to explore as well, maybe in another video. How does radium, the element radium, unwind itself? That would be something to consider. So, part 6. We must now view the visible universe from the standpoint of the principle of the ray of creation. We know that the visible universe, in its greatest magnitude, is made up of a vast number of immense star systems, of which the Milky Way is one. We must conceive that the first act of creation is comparable with making a general tenuous formation of all possible systems which are filled by increasing condensation. This we call world 3. All possible systems of worlds, since we wish to find the position of our Earth in creation, we will take next our system of worlds, which has separated from the primal mass, namely our starry galaxy or Milky Way, world 6. Out of this we will take our solar system or sun, world 12. The planetary mass formed from the sun will then be world 24, of which we take our separated planet or Earth, world 48, from which our moon is derived, world 96. This is our ray of creation. Our moon is the terminal point of that branch of the total tree of the universe in which our Earth appears. But as you will notice, so far there is no appearance of man in the ray. The whole ray is evolving. Every part of it seeks to rise higher in the scale of creation. The moon is not a dead planet, but the youngest point in our ray. Part 7. Let us try to find some simple illustrations. Any organism or organization reflects to some extent the principle of the ray of creation. Let us take any organized body of people, say the army. Let us suppose that the general is at the head, the colonel next, the captain next, the sergeant next, and the soldier last. How many laws is the soldier under? He is under the laws of the sergeant, who is under the laws of the captain, who is under the laws of the colonel, who is under the laws of the general. But the laws of the general can reach the soldier directly. Also, the laws of the colonel can reach the soldier directly, and so on. From all this, we can see 1. That the part is always under more laws than the whole, and 2. That the laws the part is under come from different sources of origin. Let us continue this brief analogy. The soldier is under the laws of the sergeant, but he may attract the attention of the captain. He will then pass under the laws of the captain. He may even attract the attention of the general. In such a case, he may pass out of the laws of the sergeant. Now let us take the analogy of the body. The body is again constructed on the principle of the ray of creation. It is an organization or organism, and all organisms obey the law of creation. Now the body as a whole is one thing. It is then divided into many systems: vascular, digestive, lymphatic, nervous, etc. Each again is subdivided into groups or parts until the smallest parts of the body are reached. This is reaching a part via the principle of the ray of creation, namely of increasing laws. For a rough example, take the muscles of your little finger. They are under their own laws, and then under the laws of the hand, and the hand is under the laws of the arm. The arm is under the laws of the muscular system in general, and the muscular system is a part of many other systems which form finally the body as a whole. This rough illustration is to show how from the top downwards increasing laws exist, and in this respect it shows the principle of the ray of creation, namely the principle of increasing laws from above downwards, and this, it must be grasped, is in the nature of things, i.e., it is a fundamental law of creation. And that concludes another intense and rather detailed letter or series of letters from Maurice Nicoll. And before I address Flippity Gibbet's question, reading this section has made me think of a great book. If you'd like to read sort of a more secular take on this, I listened to this, and I very much enjoyed it significantly. And it's a book called Scale by Geoffrey West. And I'll just read a brief bit of the blurb quickly. Geoffrey West's research centers on a quest to find unifying principles and patterns connecting everything from cells and ecosystems to cities, social networks, and businesses. Why do organisms and ecosystems scale with size in a remarkably universal and systematic fashion? Is there a maximum size of cities, of animals and plants? What about companies, etc., etc.? But go and check that out. It's just called Scale by Geoffrey West. And I'd highly recommend it because, there's no woo-woo, there's no spirituality at all. It's just science and systems thinking, I suppose it would be called. And hi there, Jordan. Nice to see you, my friend. So Flippity Gibbets asked, are these numbers themselves actually important, or is it the fact that there is a hierarchy that increases geometrically? I could pull up the section from In Search of the Miraculous if I can find it. But while I'm trying to find it, I will just... I think I found it already. So me and In Search of the Miraculous have a rather interesting relationship, but it's the absolute. The three forces exist within it, so there are no forces as we saw in the diagram. If I can go back and see the, I think this one is better. So here you can just see the absolute is above the creation, one singular law. There is no, the three forces exist as the will of the absolute. And then, you can see it expands out. But I'll just read from this section about how, I think this is the same chapter, chapter 4. This is a couple of pages after the section that I read to begin. And so in the diagram, the circle of the third order is designated by the number 6, 3 plus 3. In these worlds are created worlds of a new order, the fourth order. In the worlds of the fourth order, there act 3 forces of the world of the second order, 6 forces of the world of the third order, and 3 forces of their own, 12 forces altogether. Let us take one of these worlds and designate it by the number 12, 3 plus 6 plus 3. Being subject to a greater number of laws, these worlds stand still further away from the single will of the Absolute and are still more mechanical. The worlds created within these worlds will be governed by 24 forces, 3 plus 6 plus 12 plus 3 of their own. The world created within these worlds will be governed by 48 forces, the number 48 being made up as follows: 3 forces of the world immediately following the Absolute, 6 of the next world, 12 of the next, 24 of the one after, and 3 of its own. 3 plus 6 plus 12 plus 24 plus 3, 48 in all. The worlds created within worlds 48 will be governed by 96 forces, 3 plus 6 plus 12 plus 24 plus 48 plus 3. And so that's how we get those numbers, because you add up all of the laws and forces previous, and then every order has 3 of its own. So, like I say, chapter 4 of In Search of the Miraculous is the place to go to, if you are hungry for more forces and to understand them. But I think what we can take away, of course, in a practical sense, is in regard an aim, regards a desire, or even as regards an aversion. Like I say, it's a very simple one. If you want a drink of water, how much do you want it? You know, what's stronger, the desire for the water or the resistance of being comfortable wherever you are? And you can use many, many examples of this. Observe them. And as he says, there's no need to become aware of the third force as yet. And again, Ouspensky talks about it in Search of the Miraculous. And yes, Flibbertigibbets, it's a wonderful chapter, chapter 4. And again, it touches on all of this in great detail. And of course, send me an email if you want to share your observations. Or also, Flibbertigibbets, I don't think you're in the Discord server, are you? So also, if you'd like to join the Discord server where the fun and games never stop, then do let me know. Like I say, reach out via email and I'll give you that link so you can come in and join the community. And that's all for this evening, my friends. Like I say, the next reading will be on the law of 7, or the law of octaves, or the law of creation, as Maurice Nicoll speaks of it. And we'll carry on with Kipling's Kim also, which is nearly finished, coming to the final third, and then move on to the De Hartmann's. Hey, that's fantastic. Flibbertigibbet says, I originally came here for the Iliad readings. Now I'm invested in Gurdjieff, and that makes me smile a great deal, Flibbertigibbets. And there are many people who even came for Roald Dahl. They came for the Roald Dahl and they stayed for the Gurdjieff and Plato. And, you know, when someone goes for, they come for the BFG or Matilda or something and go, let's have a look around. And then they stumble into In Search of the Miraculous. Like I say, it's absolutely wonderful. So I'm happy to hear that, Flibbertigibbets. And it's a joy to bring the names of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky into the ears of people who might not have heard him before. And then the next step is to go and consume all of the knowledge and attempt to raise one's being. So we'll leave it there. It's wonderful to see you, although we're not going just yet, because Sophia says, thanks, Lewis, it's very intellectual. And when you think of the baby finger, you don't feel all those laws in the finger, but intellectually you can see it numerically makes sense. And yeah, I suppose in that scale book by Geoffrey West, he would say fractal in nature, right? He gives an example of a tree. You know, the tree in itself is the tree, but if you were to take like a branch and remove it and look at that, it looks like a tree. And then if you take from that branch a smaller branch and you hold that, that too looks like a tree. And that's fractals. And you could say, yeah, like he describes all of the laws. He gives the great analogy of the army, but also of the body and the finger, the little pinky. You know, if you injured your shoulder, your shoulder is higher up the hierarchy in your body. And so if you injured your shoulder, it would likely impact your hand, which may impact your little finger. Whereas if you injure your little finger, your shoulder won't matter. It doesn't affect your shoulder. You can snap your little finger off and your shoulder and your elbow would be fine. But if there was terrible joint pain in your shoulder, it may affect the hands, obviously, not necessarily, but not the other way round. So, yes, Sophia, it's definitely very intellectual, but I think when you can observe the three forces in yourself, whether it's related to desire, aversion, or aim, like he says about, I'm going to stand up all day, I'm not going to sit down. That's your aim. That's the first force, the active force. But then your tired legs, that's the second force. That wonderful looking armchair over there, that's also second force. You know, your friends saying, what are you standing up for? Have a sit down. That's also the second force. So we can see these things if we find examples and extrapolate out. We can see these things. And then, in essence, Sophia, I'd argue they stop being as intellectual when you find in lots and lots of examples, and it can become highly practical also. It's like, oh, why aren't I, again, you can find many different things, but particularly regarding aim, it's a very important concept, because why one may not be achieving one's aim is simply because the passive force is overwhelming the active force. And that's just that, right? What can you do? You can keep trying, I suppose, or increase the active force, reduce the passive force. But depending on the size of your aim, there's many forces at play. So if there's no more comments or questions, I'll say farewell. I'm getting a bit snivelly here. So, excuse me, everyone. It's great to be back. Like I say, really was like old times. And I'm very much looking forward to beginning the Hartman's wonderful memoir of Mr. Gurdjieff. And I hope to see some of the other old faces come in if they're interested in that. But for now, my friends, I'll say take care. Like I said, Flibbity Gibbets, the Discord, you're welcome. If you're interested, reach out. And everyone else, of course, can go there and have a discussion if they so choose. Or they can go to bed, or they can do whatever the three forces insist upon. For now, take care, my friends, and I will see you again soon. Look after yourselves, and bye for now. See you.